I'll tell you folks, the mid 1980s, no matter how you look at it, quite a year during the what I consider the golden renaissance of animation. Television animation, that is. I mean, you had some great Saturday morning cartoon lineups from NBC to CBS to ABC, even to syndication. There was not one place you could not tune in and not see a great Saturday morning cartoon, or at least an interesting one. Weekday mornings and weekday afternoons were no different. They had some great lineups, great shows that you could wake up to and watch before you went to school, and you could come home and watch after you got home from school. Sunday mornings even had a few lineups during syndication that you could enjoy before you would go to church, or even after you got out of church. Depending on what time depending on what service you went to, whether you went to the early service or the later service. But one thing about the 1980s too was that a lot of the shows that came out, a lot of the great animated shows that came out in the 1980s, at least one, if not a lot of them, some of the very well-known ones to a lot of us people that grew up in the 80s, like myself, Zara Nizrak, and a few others, some of them, if not a majority, ended up getting some kind of feature film out of all this. Out of all that, ended up getting some kind of feature film. Whether it was a theatrical one, direct-to-television, or direct-to-video, it seemed that any show you were a fan of, almost 90% of them, well, I wouldn't say 90%, but I'd say almost 75% of the shows you watched as a kid, one way or another, had a feature film attached to it. Now, whether or not that feature film was a compilation or it was a straight story that kind of led you into the beginning of a new series, was sort of a middle piece. You will, hold on. Sorry about that. I thought I heard something. I thought that was my mom showing up. Sometimes she gets off early and comes home early. But anyway, like I was saying, whether it was a compilation movie, basically a compilation of a lot of episodes into one, with some original animation to help tie it together, a la Looney Tunes, or whether or not it was a movie that led you into the beginning of a new series, or it was a movie that was sort of like a middle piece or finale. Well, the 1980s gave you a variety of feature films based on shows you watched. I mean, you could not, from what I could tell you from experience, you could not watch a weekday morning or Saturday morning cartoon lineup on any network, syndicated, or through the likes of NBC, a CBS, or an ABC. You couldn't tune in almost every year from 85 to 87, if not 88, and not see a commercial, if not a 30-second or minute-long movie trailer for a movie based on a show that you were watching at that time or was related to what you were watching. And when you would see that trailer, you'd be in shock because you had no idea this was happening. You really didn't. And whether or not that was and whether or not that movie, like I mentioned earlier, was theatrical, direct-to-video, or direct-to-television, you would want to see it in some form or fashion. Well, that's what the 1980s provided us with. Now, 1985 sort of started it out. If you were a fan of Care Bears, then you kind of got a taste of what we were going to be in store for. The Care Bears, although originally animated by Dick Animation and I guess some anime company associated with them, well, not just some anime company, but probably early Dick Animation, through the specials with Professor Coldheart as the villain and such. When you got to the movie kind of retconned that a little bit. And then, when you got to the sequel the following year, there was definitely a retcon and reboot right there. But Care Bears was based on something you watched on television. And now all of a sudden, here it was on the big screen. And yes, according to what Nostalgia Critic said, Doug Walker, in 1985, the Care Bears movie beat The Black Cauldron. Yeah, that movie, based on a franchise created by American Greetings that had an animated series with several specials in between, its theatrical movie debut beat Black Cauldron. It beat a Disney movie. Go figure. So, the following year, 1986 rolls around, and the Care Bears get a second movie, but they're not alone. You see, Sunbow and Marvel decided, along with D.E.G. Laurinaitis, I can't even pronounce the name right now, but D.E.G., it was called Dia Laurinaitis or something like that, came together to release 2 feature films in the span of a few months. Now, the last time I talked about something like this, I said one of them came out at the beginning of the year. I was wrong. That, I think, was saved for Care Bears. But basically, these 2 movies, distributed by DEG, Dirk Laurinaitis, whatever they're called, came out almost months within each other. One, of course, was like a Disney film, although it was based on a Hasbro product at the time, which, before this movie, had I think 1, maybe 2 animated primetime specials to help launch the franchise into its animation, into animation history, into an animated franchise, not just a toy franchise, but an animated franchise, which continues to this day with one of the most popular Hasbro shows, or Hasbro animated shows that they've ever had in recent memory. Of course, that was followed a few months later by a movie that was the complete opposite of what you saw, with this one. This one, in fact, was very dark, very violent, and a lot of main characters, or semi-main characters, were killed off, including the leader. What movies am I talking about? How about Transformers, and that's all the different versions from the Rhino, the Sony, and of course the Madman Entertainment Blu-ray, and My Little Pony. That's right. These movies came out within months of each other in 1986. This one was rated G and basically was a very Disney-like movie, musical and everything. I think you could see that. Very musical and everything. And then this, Transformers the movie, came out a few months with it. Came out basically months with a few months after. I think maybe a month or 2 after My Little Pony did. Maybe several months later. I don't know the exact release date. But these both came out within almost a very quick timeline of each other in 1986. And what a polar opposite for both of them. Here, like I said, you had a Disney-like movie in My Little Pony. And here you had a movie that basically, as some people said, changed the history of animation or animated movies as we know it. Why do I say that? Well, because, like I said, you had a Disney-like film in My Little Pony, And then you had a film that basically was the complete opposite of it. And what's funny, as you could see here, this was the rating at the time for Transformers the movie. And this was at a time that PG-13 was still slowly being integrated into the movies. And basically some movies were still being considered, if they were animated like Transformers was, they were still considered, even as violent as they were, they were still considered PG, despite how dark and violent they were. Looking back on it, though, I'm sure the people of the MPAA would have given this a PG-13 rating. But like I said, you take a look at this, and this is basically the complete opposite. And like I said, these came out months within each other, from what I understand, or from what some people have said. They came out months within. Basically, came out in a month span from each other. Basically, a few months span. And these, well, of course, these weren't the only ones that came out in 1986, though. But these did lead to something drastic. These did lead to a drastic change the following year. And I'll get into that in a second. The other movies to come out in 1986, though, that joined My Little Pony and Transformers were based on other franchises that we know. Now, I mentioned at the beginning one that we had. Now, I did mention at the beginning that several movies, if not one in particular, was a compilation, a la Looney Tunes. It had original animation to help along with the easy for me to say, complementary episodes for the compilation movie. And what movie am I talking about that had a theatrical release that was similar to the Looney Tunes movies that came before and after it? Heathcliff the movie. That's right, Heathcliff and the Cadillac Cats was so popular at the time that Dick Animation saw what was going on. Obviously, they knew what was going on with Hasbro and Sunbow and Marvel and what they were doing. And they said, you know what, we want a piece of that. Let's put a Heathcliff movie together. But they knew that the only way they could try to compete with this was to release not only the movie first, but they knew, well, I mean, obviously they knew they couldn't just animate a whole new movie altogether. I mean, they could do sequences and all that. But they knew they had to do something that would get people to come to the theaters and watch it. They needed to take a successful formula. Hold on for a sec. Sorry about that again, I thought my mom had arrived. But like I said, Dick Entertainment knew that they needed to find a way to get this to the theaters before, I think, Transformers and My Little Pony. So what did they do? They decided to take, I guess, a very successful formula that Warner Brothers used for a lot of the Looney Tunes compilation movies. And they decided, okay, let's do the same for Heathcliff. And that's exactly what they did. They basically took the best of Heathcliff, some of the best Heathcliff episodes they could find, like the Cat Father and a few others. And they decided, like I think it was the Cat Father, the Siamese Twin one, and a few others. I think even the one with Heathcliff's father. They decided to take a lot of those episodes, piece them together with some original animation with Heathcliff narrating to his nephews, who were the only new characters introduced, and thus we had Heathcliff the movie. Now, did it succeed in the box office? Well, I'll get into that in a second. Now, Heathcliff the movie, My Little Pony the movie, and the Transformers movie in 1986 were not the only films. We also had, well, something that was an answer to Transformers the movie. You see, obviously, the people at Hanna-Barbera, they obviously heard that Transformers the movie was being made, and decided that they had enough that through Tonka was the toy distributor at the time for Gobots, decided that what better way to introduce a new toy line than with a movie. Now, some might say it was coincidence that they came out around the same time as Transformers did, maybe a few months earlier. But in 1986, we got Gobots and the Battle of the Rock Lords. Now, again, this came out months before, and unlike Transformers, this had a G rating. Of course, at the time, it was made by Hanna-Barbera, and Hanna-Barbera didn't really want to go in a direction that would have been PG. And let's not forget, Gobots was more like, even though it was kind of like in the same veins as Transformers, they weren't as violent. Yeah, you could say there were some moments in Battle of the Rock Lords that would warrant this a PG rating, but it didn't. I mean, basically the death toll for Battle of the Rock Lords was for basically the unknown characters, basically like the rock leaders that we didn't even know about. And that was it. And again, like I said, it obtained itself a G rating, which is kind of surprising, but again, like I said, this pales in comparison to what Transformers was, you know, a few months later. But 1986 would also be rounded out by one more movie. 1986, even though it was part of the mid-1980s, really was the centerfold or the centerpiece for a lot of these theatrical movies. And they would finish up 1986 with this film. I think let's get that in view here. Secret of the Sword, He-Man and She-Ra. And this, believe it or not, came out about a year before the Masters of the Universe movie. Which is surprising, but it did. Now, some might say it came out in 1985, and I could be wrong on the release date, but I remember it mostly being advertised in 1986. So yeah, 1986 was really, like I said, the centerpiece for theatrical animated features. Either they had a long lifespan or a short lifespan in theaters. It was the centerpiece. Everybody wanted a piece of that pie, either through Filmation with He-Man and He-Man and She-Ra, Secret of the Sword, which introduced She-Ra to the He-Man franchise, just like Battle of the Gobots' movie Battle of the Rock Lords did for the Rock Lord characters. These movies here introduce new characters to the franchise through movies, through theatrical films. And a lot of franchises have been known to do that. Either it's theatrical, direct-to-video, or direct-to-television, they have done it. But they've all had a theatrical release. So at least they all have that in common. They all had a theatrical release. But here was the problem, though, in 1986. And this led to the following year and some major changes happening with one movie. A lot of these films bombed at the box office. The majorities bombed. Transformers and My Little Pony, even though they came out months within each other, a few months apart, if you will, from each other, both movies bombed at the box office for Hasbro. Yeah, Transformers may have made a little bit more than My Little Pony, but still they bombed at the box office. They were critical failures. Heathcliff was at the box office, but didn't have that long of a lifespan as these two did. Heathcliff had a very short lifespan and went on to be one of those Saturday morning matinee deals. Gobots, same thing. They had a lifespan longer than Heathcliff, but then that was it. They didn't have the lifespan these guys did, but they had a decent lifespan. But again, just like Heathcliff, they would go on to be a Saturday morning featurette. Same with He-Man and She-Ra, The Secret of the Sword. All these three here didn't have the lifespan, from what I understand, that these did. Maybe Gobots with the exception, and maybe He-Man and She-Ra. But these three were out of the theaters faster than these movies. But again, the one thing all 7 of them have in common: box office failures. And because of that, in 1987, another Hasbro franchise got the movie treatment in G.I. Joe. That's right, G.I. Joe got the feature film treatment. They got the feature film treatment. Unfortunately, though, they did not get the theatrical treatment. See, according to some sources, G.I. Joe originally was supposed to come out before Transformers. But that's from what I understand. However, due to some production issues and everything, they held back on it. And then, well, basically, from what I understand, the original plan, and maybe Zara Nazarak, you can help me out here. Originally, G.I. Joe was supposed to come out before Transformers theatrically. But due to some production issues or something, they couldn't make the release date in time, so Transformers was already set and ready to go, so Transformers was given a theatrical release first. However, that might have been a mistake on Hasbro's part. Because you see, even though they may have not made the release date, they still could have tried to get this out before Transformers. Here's why. When Transformers came out in theaters first, there was a lot, obviously you've probably heard about this by now, and who hasn't, there was a lot of backlash towards the movie. And why was there a lot of backlash? The fact that a lot of characters were killed off. Most importantly, Optimus Prime. Now because of that, Hasbro decided, as Zara Nazarak put it in his closer look that he uploaded this past Sunday, Hasbro decided not just at 0 hour, but decided at the last moment, before they were going to probably give it a theatrical release, they made 2 decisions. One, they would redub over the scene where Duke is supposed to die, and 2, they would pull it from a theatrical release and make it a direct-to-television and VHS release. That's what they did. They decided to pull the plug on a theatrical release, as well as take that 0 hour decision to redub the scene where Duke dies and make it to where he was in a coma. And all because of what happened in Transformers the movie with several characters, mostly Optimus Prime. And it was because of that that G.I. Joe ended up being shipped directly to television and VHS. How do I remember this? I remember as a kid reading through the TV guide, and I know that's strange for a kid around 8 years old reading through the TV guide, but hey, kids would do that to see when their favorite shows would be on Saturday mornings and weekdays, right? So I remember looking through the TV guide, and I saw, and I remember this, I don't know why I remember this so well. I remember it was on a Friday night. I don't know the month or anything, but I do remember it was on a Friday night, KTVU. It said G.I. Joe the movie in dark gray. You know, that's how they would distinguish the movies. You know, we didn't have like the on-demand guide now where it's like movies are distinguished by being in purple, shows are distinguished by being in light blue or sky blue, kids shows are distinguished by being in sky blue. Sports programs, sports entertainment wrestling programs would be distinguished by being in green. No, in the original TV guide that you would give at your Sunday paper, I remember looking at the Friday listing in Friday night, and it said G.I. Joe the movie in gray. And I was like, you know, as a kid, I was surprised. I was shocked. Of course, I told my parents about it. We watched it. And yeah, it was dark. It was violent. But obviously, it wasn't as violent as Transformers. But, you know, but still, it was there. It was there. And then later on to find out that the reason it was aired on television was because of the fact that what happened in Transformers is what caused it to go in that direction. It's kind of understandable, but like I said, if I was Hasbro, I would have still tried to get this out in theaters so that way it would get the proper theatrical release it deserved, and then maybe see the reaction and maybe either yay or nay on Transformers in theaters, but who knows? Who knows? But I still would have tried. But again, like I said, it was I was really surprised by it. And then about a month or so later, I saw it at a Blockbuster, or I think it was Neighborhood Video, and it was on VHS, and I decided to rent it. But 1987 would not be the only. But G.I. Joe, the movie, would not be the only feature film based on a franchise that you would watch on weekday or Saturday mornings that would get a feature-length film. It wouldn't. As a matter of fact, this would get it as well. Now I know you're thinking they've been around since the early 60s, but this was based more on the 1980s cartoon. It was. And it was released theatrically. Now, was it a box office success? No. Just like everything else, it was a box office bomb. Now, it probably did have a longer lifespan than some of the movies released in 1986, but still, it did not have, like I said, it did not have that long of a lifespan. Yeah, it probably had it longer than Transformers and maybe, you know, My Little Pony, but it didn't have that long of a lifespan. But still, it was the only movie based on a show that we watched in the 1980s, the mid-80s that is, that had a theatrical release. And the animation in it was good. In fact, they would carry that animation over into the following season, in which this was sort of that season was sort of a continuation of the movie. Now you might say, well, Brian, if they knew it was going to be a bomb at the box office, why do studios do that? Even to this day, why do they do that? Well, it's all depending on who writes the story, how the story is written, what its main purpose is, you know, the development of the characters, a whole bunch of stuff. Nowadays, a lot of people that grew up on these shows, when they do the live action or even the CGI film adaptations of these franchises, they treat them with more respect. The reason being is because they know they don't want to make the same mistake as the previous writers that had done the 80s incarnations from 85 to 87 had done. They want to make sure that these movies are given the proper respect. But yeah, I could say this. Had they known these probably would have been a failure, they probably wouldn't have released them directly to theaters. They probably would have done what Hasbro did with G.I. Joe and done a direct-to-television, maybe VHS release. Now you might say, no, that's all fine and good, Brian, but how did this all get started? Well, I think in a sense, we can thank movies like this. We can thank Hey There, It's Yogi Bear, movies like that, movies like the man called Flintstone. We can thank movies like Mighty Mouse, The Great Space Chase, which was basically, as Aaron Isaac knows, and I've told him when I gave him a copy, was basically a compilation of 11-minute serials of the Mighty Mouse show back, I think, in the early 80s, late 70s. You can thank stuff like that for us getting theatrical movie versions of some of the shows we watched during the 1980s. Now, were there more that came out? Certainly. But not as prominent as what we had here. Now, there were some missed opportunities. Don't get me wrong. I mean, Dick Entertainment themselves had tons of opportunities. Sure, they tested the waters with Heathcliff, but they had tons of opportunities. They had Chasing the Wheeled Warriors. They had the Cadillac Cats. They could have given a whole freaking adventure on that. They could have done a whole new animated movie on them. Or even given the compilation treatment they did Heathcliff. You had Brave Star. You know, you had shows like that. You know, you had Brave Star. What else did you have? You had Pole Position, which was based on a game, but was still an 80s cartoon. You had all these options, and yet they never took advantage of them. They had Thundar the Barbarian. They had Galator, if you will. They had They had Goldie Gold and Action Jack. A lot of these studios, Dick Entertainment, Ruby Spears, of course, responsible for doing the animation for these guys. Ruby Spears, Dick Entertainment, Hasbro. I mean, Hasbro had other franchises like Inhumanoids. Inhumanoids didn't get that much of a run, but if you would have done a movie on them in some ways, not a direct-to-video one, but a theatrical one, all new animation, would have been perfect. Nowadays, also, there's a lot of shows from Nickelodeon that could do this, and yet it's all about taking advantage. But again, though, there's a lot of shows back in the 80s, mid-80s and stuff that really could have benefited as well. True, they may have not had they may have had similar lifespans as the ones I just showed you. And true, they may have not been in the theaters very long, but at least they would have had at least they could go down and say they had some kind of theatrical release. Sometimes a theatrical movie release is a great way to wrap things up. Just like originally Hasbro and Sunbow, just like originally Marvel and Sunbow were going to do with G.I. Joe the movie. The movie was supposed to be the finale. Of course, Dick Entertainment bought up the rights and decided to continue it. But that's cool. That's cool. I mean, obviously they saw what Transformers was doing and what the Chipmunks had done, which they also had acquired the rights to animate at the time. Or distribute at the time. So obviously they decided to take a stab at that and go for 2 seasons. But anyway, like I said, from 85 to 87, the mid-80s basically was the year of the theatrical movie release of shows we grew up on watching in the 1980s. Were they successes? No. Did they cause some future releases during that time to be changed up? Oh yeah. Was it kind of counterculture how one movie was like a Disney-like film and then the following few months later the same distributor releases another Hasbro product that's basically the complete opposite? Oh yeah. Stuff like that existed. But that's just how it was in the mid-80s. Will we ever get something like that again down the line where it's almost like when you tune in, you end up seeing something that's a theatrical film based on something that you watch as a kid or based on some kind of toy franchise, and then here comes another one, another one, another one? Are we going to get that kind of run that we had back from 85 to 87? Probably, but it's only time will tell. So, that's all I'm going to say. Let me know what you guys think. What did you think of the mid-80s when all these theatrical movies from 85 to 87 were released based on the shows and franchises that we were watching and growing up with at the time? Let me know what you guys think down below. Comment if you like, and I am out. Hey everyone. Now I've talked about this before, but it's still kind of surprising to me. You know, it's hard to believe that it's been about 30 years between 85 and 87, 30 to 32 years. But it was in between these between these times that we pretty much got an influx of theatrical feature films based on animated series, but mostly based on a toy franchise that was adapted into an animated series. It's like you couldn't turn anywhere between 85 and 87 without seeing a television trailer or going to the movies at the drive-ins or the theaters themselves, the cinemas, and seeing a trailer before another family film, for an animated movie based on an animated show which was based on a toy franchise that you grew up on, or that you collected, or your parents bought, helped you, basically that you were into. And between 85 and 87, those were mostly known, I think, in the eyes of a lot of people as the theatrical animated toy years. That's right, the animated theatrical toy years. And what that means is any animated movie that came out between that time, whether or not it was from Disney. Okay, well, basically the exceptions were any animated movie between 85 and 87, with the exception of Disney and Universal and Warner Brothers or whoever. Any movie that came out between that time frame was mostly an animated film based on a toy line that was adapted into an animated series before or afterwards. And there was such an influx of animated properties, animated films between that time frame that, like I said, you couldn't turn around. You couldn't turn on your television on Saturday mornings or weekday afternoons or weekday mornings and watch an animated block, or go to the theaters and, like I say, watch maybe an animated family feature or just a live action family feature, and not get bombarded with a trailer or two of an animated film based on an animated series that was based on a toy line. You couldn't go anywhere. It's like you seemingly had an influx of these movies. And as a kid that grew up in the 80s, between the time frame of 85 to 87, I was between the ages of 6 to 8 years old. And for someone like me, growing up at that time, I'm sure for someone like Rob of Rob the Wonderful here on YouTube, for someone like Doug Walker, the Nostalgia Critic, James Wolfe, Angry Video Game Nerd, for a lot of us out there, this was just a major, and for anybody else that grew up in the 80s and enjoyed Saturday morning cartoons and everything, for us, this was a major deal. It's like, you could collect Transformers, you could collect My Little Ponies, G.I. Joes, Gobots, Pound Puppies, you name it. And before you knew it, just as you're collecting them and you're tuning in and watching the cartoons either on the weekdays or Saturday mornings, before you knew it, you'd end up seeing a TV spot, a TV trailer, if you will, for a movie based on what you were watching and what you were collecting. And I have right before me, about right now, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 movies between that time frame. 6 movies. 6 movies based on properties, on toy franchises that got turned into animated series, that got adapted into animated movies, that my sisters, my cousins, and people here on YouTube, like I said, Rob the Wonderful, to James Wolfe and Doug Walker, etc., grew up on watching on Saturday mornings, or on the weekday afternoons, or weekday mornings. 6 movies, maybe more so. I think Brave Star even had one too. But the more notable ones that I remember, and anybody else remembers, range from Transformers, G.I. Joe, He-Man, you name it. You know, even Care Bears, yes, they got about 3 movies, but they were based on American greeting cards that got turned into a toy, that got adapted into a toy franchise that went up into theaters and became a success. But, excuse me. But the thing is, with 85 to 87, it's like I said, you couldn't go anywhere. You couldn't tune in any channel, syndicated or network, and not see a TV spot, TV trailer, if you will, for a film based on what you were watching currently or what you were collecting on whatsoever. And the thing is, for these movies right here that I have in my hand, for these 6 movies, including things like Brave Star and a few others, but these being the most, as far as I know, the most noteworthy films based on animated properties that are based on toy franchises, it was like a dream come true. It's like when you saw a trailer for this, for My Little Pony, hold on, this is the complete series. Here it is. But when you saw a trailer for the My Little Pony movie being distributed by DEG, the D. Leonidas, or DEG, basically Do Leonidas' group, who also distributed King Kong Lives. When you saw this being probably played trailerized before it, you think, you know, of course, it being PG-13, you're going to go tell your kid, oh, by the way, they showed a trailer for My Little Pony. Of course, that's going to get your young kid, your young daughter excited, like, oh my gosh. But what's ironic about this is My Little Pony, the way this movie came about wasn't just because of wasn't just because of the toys being a success. No, the toys were successful enough that in syndication, and I think on ABC, they had 2 primetime specials. Those specials were initially the pilot, Escape from Midnight Castle, or whatever you want to call it. I think that's what it was called. I think that's what it was called. I can't really remember. It's called. I think it was called Escape from Midnight Castle. Let me check. Oh, Rescue from Midnight Castle, Escape Midnight Castle, whatever name it went out under, and then of course you had Escape from Katerina. So you had these 2 primetime specials that served as the pilots for essentially the movie that served as a bigger pilot and continuation that led into the series that followed. Because the first 5 episodes of My Little Pony G1, the animated series, was a sequel to the movie. So sometimes these movies served as pilots, if not continuing pilots, continuity-wise, for a series. And what's funny is My Little Pony the movie wouldn't be the only series that would do this. As a matter of fact, He-Man, of course, had been on the air for about 6 years at this time. Well, actually 2 years at this time when this came out, but about, well, not 6 years. What am I talking about? 3 years, 2 to 3 years, I should say. He-Man was on the air, and it was one of the Ultimate Boy cartoons. Of course, girls watched it too because Teela was a fierce female protagonist. You know, basically a female protagonist that most of the time can hold her own. And then you had the Sorceress that proved the same thing. But then came TV spots, trailers for Secret of the Sword, but it wasn't called He-Man Masters of the Universe, the movie. No, we wouldn't get that until about 87, and that's critically got mixed reactions because it's loosely based on the show and the toy franchise, and it's like its own thing, stuff like that. But when you started getting the TV spots and of course theatrical trailers for Secret of the Sword, you notice that, like I said, it wasn't called He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. No, it was called He-Man and She-Ra. That's right. Secret of the Sword was basically a pilot movie, a theatrical pilot movie for the She-Ra Princess of Power series. That's what it was. But here's the strange thing about this. The movie is actually 5 different episodes of She-Ra. It's the first 5 episodes of She-Ra. It's the miniseries. It's the miniseries pilot. It's the 5-part miniseries pilot condensed into a movie. It's kind of like what Louis Lovehog, Linkara, and Vega mentioned in the recent unboxing about a month ago, going on a month now, which of course they unboxed and on some of the things I sent them and read the letter I sent them. But anyway, they said that when they went and saw Yu-Gi-Oh! Dark Side of Dimensions, Vega mentioned that Louis had said that it was like they had condensed an entire season. Both Louis and Vega, I should say, mentioned that it felt like they had condensed an entire season of Yu-Gi-Oh! Into a movie. It's like, because you had so much going on. That's exactly what happened here. Filmation took the 5 episodes of the 5 pilot episodes, the 5-part miniseries, the 5-part miniseries pilot, I should say, easy for me to say, and they condensed it into a movie, basically an 87-minute movie. That's what they condensed it into. So, thus the movie itself served theatrically as a pilot for the series, even though a few months later you would end up seeing the same movie, the same scenario, the same scenes and all that on television in 5 parts, because initially that's what Secret of the Sword really was. It was basically the 5-part miniseries condensed into a movie. And it was to help promote the She-Ra animated series, but also help further along the popularity of He-Man that was still going strong at that time. So, yeah. So yes, He-Man and She-Ra were the first ones to do it in '85, along with Care Bears. And then, of course, like I said, My Little Pony followed a year later with My Little Pony the movie, but also that same time frame, about probably around the same time My Little Pony the movie came out, we also had Gobots, Battle of the Rock Lords. Now, Gobots came out around '83, '84. And it was distributed by Hanna-Barbera. It was based on the Tonka line of changing robots, of robots that changed into vehicles and everything, robots being from the planet Gobotron, stuff like that. And they had a new toy line they wanted to, of course, get people familiar with, and that was the Rock Lords. So they decided what better way to do it than to basically make a movie called Battle of the Rock Lords, which was basically a crossover between the Gobots and the Rock Lords. So, yeah. So, yeah, basically, the following year, Paramount, along with Hanna-Barbera and Tonka, distributed Gobots Battle of the Rock Lords, which served as an introduction to the Rock Lords line that was spun off on the Gobots line by Tonka at that time. And again, like I said, it served its purpose, just like Secret of the Sword served its purpose as a pilot for She-Ra, and My Little Pony served its purpose as a continuation of the 2 specials that came before, and thus as a theatrical pilot for the movie that followed. Gobots, of course, continued on after this, but Rock Lords, I don't think they were ever seen after this ever. I don't think we ever saw them ever again in their own show or comic or anything. But yeah, the Rock Lords crossed over with the Gobots in this movie, and basically the movie was served to promote the Rock Lords line. And then, of course, in that same year, a little afterwards, you had DEG, D-Leonidas, or Dental Leonidas, I should say, easy for me to say. Again, the people that distributed King Kong Lives. Not only did they distribute Hasbro's My Little Pony the movie as a theatrical pilot for the series and a continuation of the other two specials. But they also distributed about a month and a half later Transformers the movie. And what a big difference. You know, what a big difference, because you go from a Disney-esque theatrical film that's a pilot for your new series to a violent, over-the-top violent animated movie that takes place in between seasons 2 and 3. And you know, for me it was a dream come true, because I remember several times sitting at home watching Transformers, and I saw the pilot, and I saw the trailers, the TV spots, and I've mentioned before, I would basically want my parents to take me to go see it, but they never did. I had to wait till it came out on VHS. Fortunately, I was one of the first people to reserve it from Neighborhood Video in Hayward, California, to watch it. But yeah, I remember when this came out, and again, like I said, looking online, doing some research, it came out a month and a half after My Little Pony, and I think about a month and a half after Gobots did, but it was still in that time frame between 85 and 87 where you had this influx of theatrical animated films based on toy lines that were adapted into animated series, either currently or going to be. And like I said, Transformers the movie served as a bridging point between seasons 2 and 3 of Generation 1. But then, that's not enough. In 1987, the toy line craze would still continue. In 1987, theatrically, we ended up getting another movie based on a toy line, but this was distributed by Family Home Entertainment, I believe. Family Home Entertainment. I don't know if they distributed theatrically. I'd have to look at the poster I have somewhere. I do have a poster of this movie. I think it was Orion Pictures that did it. I don't really know. But it was somebody else. It was either Orion Pictures or... No, it was Columbia TriStar. That's who it was. Columbia TriStar distributed this in theaters. Family Home Entertainment got the rights. FHE. Family Home Entertainment got the rights to distribute it on video. And Family Home Entertainment, like I said, were the ones that through... I should say, Family Home Entertainment, FHE, were the ones through Columbia TriStar that distributed in theaters. And then, of course, they were able to secure the rights for the VHS distribution later on. But again, this falls in that category between 85 and 87 of movies based on toy lines that were adapted into animated films currently or going to be. And this was basically in the current genre, current category, because this show was still on syndication and Saturday mornings on ABC, and that's of course Pound Puppies. And of course Pound Puppies ended up getting a theatrical film, and they ended up getting a film called Legend of Big Paw. That's right, this is actually a movie that, as strange as it sounds, completely differentiates itself from the animated series. It does. It's so totally different. I mean, you got the same characters, they've been redesigned, and of course, to look more feature film, more fluid. I mean, the characters are basically more animated to look more fluid. The designs are animated to look more fluid. The designs, like I say, the characters basically have been redesigned to look more up to date. And the animation has definitely been improved to be more fluid and feature film-like. But another thing is we kind of get an idea as to when the TV series takes place, maybe, and that's in the 50s. We don't know that initially because, like I said, this is a complete departure in many people's eyes from the animated series. But Legend of Big Paw kind of gives you the idea that this takes place within the same context as the television show, mostly through giving you the idea of what the time frame is of when the show takes place. So yeah, you had the Pound Puppies, the movie, The Legend of Big Paw. That was part of it. And then, following in the footsteps of My Little Pony and Transformers, you had, of course, G.I. Joe. Unfortunately, behind the scenes, G.I. Joe never made it to theaters because of production reasons. That's why Transformers went ahead. Originally, it was supposed to be G.I. Joe, then Transformers. But Transformers went ahead because they were ahead on schedule. And then also, the reaction that a lot of people had, kids, parents, and everybody had, to the death of Optimus Prime. See, originally, Duke, spoilers here, was supposed to die in G.I. Joe the movie, sacrificing himself to save his brother Falcon. But because they saw the reaction that people gave over the death of Optimus Prime in the Transformers film, they were thankful, I guess, that it was delayed production-wise, because then they re-edited the scene where Duke's supposed to die and just say he went into a coma. So because of that, the whole theatrical run, this whole influx, this whole current era, this era of theatrical films based on toys, these animated theatrical films based on toy lines, on toy franchises that were adapted into animated shows, came to an end, not theatrically, but came to an end, I should say, when G.I. Joe was released, not theatrically, but exclusively on television and on home video. Yeah, G.I. Joe the movie was distributed exclusively on home video through Classic Kids and then Family Home Entertainment and on television. It was never given a theatrical run, even though it was originally planned to. But yeah, when you look at it, when you look at these movies and along with things like Brave Star, I think that got a limited run in theaters, along with some others I can't really think of. Between 85 and 87, it was definitely a huge influx of animated films based on toy franchises. Now, the one thing a lot of these films had in common, unfortunately, was the fact that they got critically panned. G.I. Joe, I don't think got critically panned because it never went to theaters, so it was fortunate, but they got so critically panned that any other movies based on toy franchises like Gem, because Gem was originally supposed to get a movie too, never got off the ground. They were ceased. They were ceased and halted as they were in production. So, yeah, or they were just scrapped before they even got off the ground. So, yeah, that's the one thing a lot of these movies, with the exception of G.I. Joe, that they have in common. They were all critically panned for the fact that, in the eyes of some critics, they didn't really have any real good story. They didn't have any other real purpose but besides selling toys. That's what they were. And some of them were critically panned, I'm pretty sure, because like with He-Man and She-Ra, and I'm pretty sure with My Little Pony, they were basically serving themselves as pilots for an upcoming animated series later on. And I'm not sure how the critical response was to Secret of the Sword, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't a good one. When I'm sure word got out that the movie was actually was a condensation of the five-part miniseries pilot. But yeah, it's hard to believe that 31 years ago you had this influx of animated films based on toy franchises. Now, do we still have them now? Now the thing is, do we still have them today? Absolutely, but they're far and few in between. That's the thing. The far and few in between. But what's ironic is whether you like how they're directed, written, produced, according to a lot of people, the one thing a lot of people will say that they have in common is these are done more correctly, more passionately, and have more of a connection to the source material and a reason for being than what we had 31 years ago. So that's really all I have to say. But yeah, it's hard to believe 31 years ago, about 30 to 31, 32 years ago, we had this influx of animated films based on toy franchises. So that's really all I'm going to say, folks. Let me know what you think down below. Comment if you like, and I'm out.